Thank you indeed. And while the PowerPoint is being prepared, I'll just start by saying that I'll be concentrating on the Irish courts management model and the way in which it supports or underpins judicial independence. But by way of backdrop to that, Ireland ranks consistently amongst the top 6 or 7 countries in the world for perception of judicial independence. I emphasize that, perception of judicial independence in the World Economic Forum's surveys. And one may ask, why is that? Well, that I suggest, and I am obviously subjective about this, after 42 years of service as a court officer and senior manager in the Irish court system, but that I suggest is attributable in part to some factors which may not be replicable to a civil law tradition jurisdiction, others which certainly are, I suggest. And I list a few of those. In terms of the status of a judge in Ireland, I think it's fair to say that that status reaches a very high watermark in terms of individual and institutionally guaranteed independence. Coming back to a point that Professor Judge Ebo Osuji mentioned, Irish judges are not public servants or civil servants, and indeed if you suggested to many Irish judges that they were public servants or civil servants, you might receive a rather pained reaction. They are independent office holders under statute. Allied to that, as is the case in the United States and other common law jurisdictions, they are people with considerable experience as professional practitioners. There are people like Steve who come into their career as judges reasonably late into their careers. They have spent their time arguing cases before judges, sometimes even arguing with judges, and by the time they reach the bench, they are not in awe of court presidents, they are not in awe of court managers, and they are certainly not in awe of ministries of justice or ministers for justice. So that does help the situation in terms of the propensity for judges to be independent. We are not dealing with, in the English phrase, shrinking violets by any means. Judges in Ireland also hold terms of tenure which certainly support very considerably their independence individually. Short of the nuclear option, as I would describe it, of impeachment on the basis of a resolution passed by both houses of Parliament for stated misbehaviour or incapacity, judges are not subject to any disciplinary regime. If a judge comes in late in the morning, goes home early in the afternoon, while that judge may be spoken to by a court president, the court president has no personnel management powers which would enable that judge to be the subject of any form of disciplinary sanction, including, by the way, transfer in the case of a judge serving in a court of local and limited jurisdiction to another venue. Judges in Ireland are not transferable without their consent. In addition to that, judges are not part of a career structure. If a judge is appointed to a jurisdictional instance, there is no career path that they necessarily may aspire to. There is no salary scale. They receive a single point salary, which is not increasable and certainly constitutionally not reducible in ordinary circumstances. We introduced during our financial crisis by referendum a change to the Constitution to allow for judges' salaries to be reduced, but only as part of a general reduction in salaries across the public service. We suffered a reduction in salary, the order of 20 to 25% during the crisis, and ultimately judges were subjected to that, but leaving aside that consideration, which I think it could be argued meets standards within the Council of Europe space, judges are not subject to any form of financial sanction related to their conduct of or discharge of their duties. So that is the backdrop, if you like, to our court management model. The court management model in Ireland, the court service, was introduced in the late 1990s on a permanent basis in 1999, interestingly as a result of pressure on politicians within business and the labour sector, indeed, for a modern court management model that would enable litigation to be disposed of in a manner which contributed rather than acted as a brake, if you like, on economic growth and development. It's a subject which hasn't figured very much, I think it's fair to say today. Steve did advert to it from his standpoint as an advocate for clients around the world, but certainly that whole nexus between an independently, efficiently functioning court system and its potential contribution to promotion of investment and economic growth is not a subject to be ignored. The justice system doesn't exist for that purpose, needless to say. It exists for higher purposes, but there is that byproduct which should not, I suggest, be ignored. In any event, the court service was established in 1999 with the statutory mandate to manage the courts, not the judges. You'll have already deduced that judges are not effectively subject to any personnel management regime at all. To provide support services for the judges, to provide information on the court system to the public outreach, if you like, to provide, manage and maintain court buildings, and to provide facilities for users of the courts. Its status is that of an independent agency under statute. It is quite separate in terms of its legal persona from the judiciary, and certainly from the Department of Justice, the Ministry of Justice. A leading commentator at the time indicated that its creation represented a fundamental shift in the philosophy of the court system, requiring it to take account of the concepts of quality, service, and competitiveness more associated heretofore with the private sector. There can be no doubt, the commentator suggested, of a move from court system to court service. The governing body of the court service, very importantly and significantly, consists as to its majority of the judiciary. The board is chaired by the Chief Justice or a judge of the Supreme Court nominated by the Chief Justice, and of the 18 members, 10 are judges. The senior judges are represented on the board ex officio, and there are judges elected from each jurisdictional instance. The chief executive of the agency is a member of the board. The legal professions, as you know from the common law, your knowledge of the common law tradition, we have a bifurcated profession. The barristers and solicitors are represented. A staff member of the court service, the Minister for Justice has a nominee, only one, and there is a representative of consumers of court services, of court users represented on the board, nominated by the minister, and representatives, a representative of labour, and a person again nominated by the minister with experience of commerce, finance, and administration. So we have a dominance of the judiciary on that board, but we also have representation from those who regularly use the courts, and indeed we have some input from persons with managerial or entrepreneurial expertise that always proves useful in the operation of government agencies, certainly in my experience. That is our courts service organisation structure. You'll see at the pinnacle of it is that court service board. It has various committees, and audit committee, finance committee, building committee, family law court development committee, and various other specific issue committees, on all of which, may I say, judges, be they members of the board or co-opted as members of these committees, actively participate. Beneath that overall governance echelon, we have our senior management cadre. We have a senior management team headed by the chief executive. I'm one of the senior managers, and we have various directorates within the court service. My directorate, Reform and Development, concerned with reform of court process and procedure and jurisdictional arrangements, is one of them. But that is the structure at the higher levels of the organisation. And just turning to my last slide, I've mentioned some of these points already. Albeit that we are a statutory independent agency, we don't operate in a vacuum. So we are obliged to follow certain government policies, but not in terms of the administration of justice. I'm talking about policies such as equality of treatment, promotion of our national language, our first national language, the Irish language, providing facilities for persons with disabilities, and so on. Our budget, certainly, while we prepare it, is subject to settlement with the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Public Expenditure. The other features of our arrangements are that in our founding statute, the Court Service Act of 1998, there is a specific provision precluding the court service operating in any way so as to interfere with the conduct of judicial business. Judicial business, the conduct of business before a judge, is exclusively within the control of a judge. This harks back to this fault line that I mentioned earlier, reflected in that decision of the Supreme Court of Canada in Valente versus the Queen. So in terms of allocation of cases, how many cases a judge may deal with every day, or have listed before him or her at least. They can't be forced to deal with a certain number of cases, not even by their court president. Where judges sit in terms of one courtroom or another. We provide the information, the management information to the president, but ultimately issues such as allocation and distribution of business are matters for the president of the courts concerned, and the actual extent to which a judge clears their docket every day, the number of adjournments they grant, those factors are exclusively within the individual judge's remit. Judicial training is exclusively under the control of the judiciary. We provide the means, the facilities, the funding, but judges decide what they are to be trained in and about. In terms of our accounting for money spent, of course there is democratic control over the way public monies voted to us are spent. That is achieved via, first of all, the central government audit and control arrangements. We are subject, as with any public body, to audit by the Controller and Auditor General, not merely for how we spend, for the money we spend, but the value for money aspect in the way we spend our allocation. We also account to Parliament. Our CEO and people like me appear before committees of Parliament to explain how we have managed our remit, discharged our remit. But very importantly, in accounting to Parliament, our founding statute precludes Parliament or Committee of Parliament from requiring us to give account for any matter relating to the exercise by a judge of his or her judicial functions, including a matter the subject of court proceedings. When the Ministry of Justice yielded up management of the courts back in the late 90s to us, it did retain a courts policy division, but this is largely concerned not so much with well, it is certainly not concerned with deciding how judges discharge judicial business. It is concerned mostly with providing the primary legislation related to new court jurisdiction, new arrangements concerning the operation of the courts, which need to be reflected in primary legislation. But a good part of that content comes from the court service by way of proposal in terms of its content. The Minister continues to be responsible in Parliament for presenting the court services budget and for answering questions concerning resourcing of the courts. But as indicated already, the Minister will not, and indeed parliamentary procedure and protocol would preclude him or her from doing so, will not answer to any question concerning the way in which a judge has dealt with a case, or indeed issues which are strictly within the judicial province, such as what training the judges have decided to set for themselves from year to year. That a short run-through of our court management model and its role in supporting and maintaining judicial independence. Many thanks.